Hey, it's Pete Mundo. Before the podcast starts, could you do us a favor at KCMO? We don't ask you for much outside of supporting our sponsors and advertisers. Could you leave us a 5-star rating and review? Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Helps us a lot. We so appreciate you doing that. Another morning and more snow is hitting the Kansas City Metro. Glad you're here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We're streaming, as always, on the KCMO Talk Radio app. And yes, the snow is falling. It is a very fine snow. I don't know if you noticed that, Mark, but there was blacktop on 435 for me this morning. So it's not the worst it's been. Last week was worse driving in here. Of course, 6 weeks ago was awful driving in here when we had that 10 to 12 inches of snow. But at least we've got some blacktop this morning. It's a very fine blowing wind. You still have to be careful, but it's not as bad as it's been.
Yeah, especially in areas where it's a little bit more open. The snow's blowing around more, so there won't be as much.
Yeah, the wind is really howling out there. Now, just a quick traffic alert. I-70 eastbound is closed just past exit 24 in Grain Valley. So you're going to have to use an alternate route if you're heading out that way or you're in eastern Jackson County. I-70 eastbound closed past exit 24 in Grain Valley. There was an accident as well that is blocking a couple of lanes. So right now you want to be monitoring and checking on, of course, your routes to work if you have to go in today. If you don't, kick back, stream us on the app, on the Alexa, on the Google Home, and we'll have you covered for the next 4 hours until Kevin Keatsman uncanceled on KCMO 95.7 FM. Now, of course, we'll talk to City Manager Brian Platt coming up here in about 10 minutes. We'll get the lay of the land from Kansas City, and we'll also be checking in with our KCTV5 reporter, Nathan Brennan. He is out on the streets. Mark loves our buddy Nathan. He's always hustling, that guy.
Oh, yeah. He's having a good time. He always is pleasant on the phone.
He's always got a smile on his face, even when he's out there in minus 20-degree wind chills with his cameraman trying to get a good shot for the TV. But he's going to be good this morning. We look forward to having him on KCMO.
Man, I saw a utility guy out there working on some lines just up the street. That's got to be a terrible job today.
Hey, man, listen, those guys are hustling. They're hustling out there. I give them all the credit in the world. Listen, we are blessed to do what we do every single day. So at the very least, we can get you all the information that you need. And, of course, if there's anything not being reported, share with us at 913-408-7957. Can we talk about something warm now? Baseball. I know it feels like we are months away from seeing a baseball game at the K, but we're actually only like 5.5 weeks away from opening day. Can you believe that? It's not that far off. It's the last week of March. Opening day out at the K for the Royals after they got to the playoffs for the first time in a decade last year.
Feels like with the Chiefs' long runs every year, then it's like baseball season just pops up out of nowhere.
Well, that's a very good point. When you've been spoiled the way this town has with the Chiefs playing until basically mid-February, you wake up a week later and you're like, oh, yeah, baseball's coming. Oh, pitchers and catchers reported before the Super Bowl. I didn't realize that. Oh, yeah, that's right. But, of course, from a news perspective, the question remains, where are the Royals going to play? John Sherman actually said something about this yesterday. No, the owner of the baseball team actually talked and made comments publicly about where he wants to play baseball.
Talk about a bombshell.
You're shocked, and I'm shocked. And that in and of itself is news. Here's what John Sherman had to say, and let's try to read between the lines together here.
I think this is going to be a very exciting thing for our community, right? It's about economic development. It's also about securing the long-term home for the Royals. We're working very hard, and we got a deal that's buttoned up, and we're ready to talk about. We're looking forward to being able to do this.
The first thing that John Sherman says there is that it's about economic development. I thought that was interesting. That leads me to believe that whatever he's got planned continues to be more than just a baseball stadium. That it's not just about building a ballpark that's good for the next 50 years at least for the team, is a good fit for Kansas City. It's basically a business proposal, business project. It's not just a baseball stadium. I might be reading into it too much, but listen, it's all we've got. The guy hasn't said anything about this in months, and God bless him. I think he's a good man who has Kansas City's best interests at heart. I genuinely believe that for John Sherman. I don't know him well. I've met him a handful of times. He's come on the show. We have some mutual friends that I trust and really, lean into the fact that John Sherman loves this team, loves this town, and wants them to stay. And to his credit, John Sherman has never broken out if you guys don't do what I need, I'm leaving town. To his credit, he's never done that. There are some owners, especially after the vote went down in Jackson County last spring, and Jackson County voters said we are not extending the 3.8 sales tax for you to build this stadium in the Crossroads. There are some owners who would have said, well, if you don't do what I want, I'm taking this baby out of town. We're going to Austin. We are going to Nashville. We might just leave Kansas City. He's never once done that. I respect him for that. But we also have not gotten a lot of information. The taxpayer has not been a part of this conversation. Now, you can say, well, there's nothing to share. Okay, so what's going to happen here? Are we just going to wake up one day and there's going to be an announcement and they're going to say, well, we're going to play baseball at Washington Square Park. We're going to play baseball at the old Sprint Center or the old Sprint Campus in Johnson County at 119th and Knoll? Now, if I'm reading too much into John Sherman's comments there, where the first thing he mentions is economic development, that's fine. I'll stand corrected on it. But that would lead me to believe that maybe Johnson County is moving up in the conversation. Because Washington Square Park is not big enough to build anything around it. Heck, it would barely fit a baseball stadium. That is basically adjacent to Union Station, Crown Center, in that area. If you're not familiar with that part of town, it's kind of between those two that frankly doesn't need a lot of economic development. No one's sitting there saying, you know what? Gosh, we need some more foot traffic around Crown Center and Union Station. They're doing just fine. So if he's talking economic development, that would lead me to believe that he's talking about something grandiose beyond just a baseball stadium. And the other place that's getting a lot of attention on that front would be this old Sprint Campus at 119th and Knoll. Now, I think putting a baseball stadium there is possibly the dumbest idea I've ever heard for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which, I don't know how you're getting out of a place down there to 435. It's going to take you an hour to get from 119th and Knoll to 435 to get people out of a game. Along with the fact that you've got people sitting in $1 million homes who now are going to be hearing baseball games in their backyard. It's just ridiculous. It is going to destroy neighborhoods in that area where people are going to say, I don't want to live near a baseball stadium. None of that sounds like a good idea.
And the mayor tweeted this just offhand to somebody yesterday. I spotted it and posted it on our account.
So Mayor Lucas put this up on X yesterday?
Yes.
What you're about to read to me?
Yes, he
All
commented.
Right. What did he say?
He said they're not moving out there, talking about towards the Legends. And then he said, no one has discussed that in a while. If you're looking to Kansas, look further south in Johnson County.
Further south in Johnson County. So that could mean Spring Campus, but it could mean further south.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that was kind of interesting from the mayor.
Let's go to the Kansas City Royals' new ballpark in Spring Hill.
Yeah. They have a nice softball complex down there.
Where are we going here? It's going to be closer for people in Tulsa than people in the Northland to get to a game.
Maybe they'll take over the old Great Mall in Olathe, like I suggested last year.
Yeah, well, that was a good idea you had, Mark. It's going to be great for our friends down in Lynn County. They're going to be a hop, skip, and a jump to a game. Meantime, if you're downtown, you're going to have to stay overnight. Oh, my goodness. We'll get to more of this coming up on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Hey, I'm just thinking about being out at the ballpark, sweating at the K, because this morning it is 2 degrees. The feel like is -10, and it is snowing across Kansas City. Be safe out there. An accident at I-70 westbound at 635 is blocking a couple of lanes right now. And also note that out in Eastern Jack, I-70 eastbound to exit 24, Grain Valley area is closed. So definitely want to be safe and be careful as you travel around this morning in Kansas City. We're learning more about the farmers market in Kansas City that has been shut down courtesy of DOGE that is getting a lot of attention over the last 24 hours. And the more I hear the story, the more I sit here and say to myself, why was this farmers market getting federal dollars to begin with? That's what I can't figure out. So Fox 4 had this story that budget cuts hit close to home on Kansas City's east side. The Agriculture Department canceled funding for a program in the Ivanhoe neighborhood. They write here, the cancellation of this grant will impact the Farmers Market Promotion Program, which supports local growers and helps get fresh produce to local people. Seems admirable. But for a country running a $2 trillion deficit, I know it's not the make or break thing. I realize that. But guess what? When you talk about trimming the fat, it's not like there's one big piece of fat that's going to get trimmed. If you want to lose 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, you don't drop it all at once. You drop it a pound at a time, a half a pound at a time, a quarter pound at a time. It's taking time. It's miles on the treadmill. It's hitting the weights. It's doing all these things that you have to do that really allows you to trim a lot of fat. And I'm sorry, but farmers markets are not necessary things for the federal government to fund in Kansas City. If Kansas City thinks that they've got to have this farmers market on the east side, then that's on your city council to fund it. That is not on the federal government to fund it. And here's part of the Fox 4 reporting that came down last night.
The Ivanhoe Neighborhood Council was awarded the grant in October. Over 3 years, Henry's team...
Now, stop right there. So this came down in October to the Ivanhoe Neighborhood Council. So they were 4 months into this grant. It was supposed to be for 3 years. So that tells me that there was a farmer's market operating before the federal government money came in. So this is a classic business example of LIFO. Last in, first out. When you're trimming fat at any company, when you're making budget cuts, it doesn't always go this way, but typically your most recent hires will be some of the first to go. Why? Well, they haven't been with the company that long. They're easier to let go, less of an impact on morale. That's what it is. It's LIFO. It's last in, first out. So this thing had been in place with the Ivanhoe Neighborhood Council for all of 4 months. So when they're going down the list and they're looking at things to cut, this is an easy one to cut. And if the farmers market was already operating before October, which it sounds like it has been for quite some time, then spare me the whole oh, how are we going to feed the people on the east side without the farmers market? Well, that sounds like a disingenuous argument as far as I can tell. Once I find out from Fox 4 that this grant's only been around for 3 or 4 months. Let's continue with the reporting.
Expected to receive nearly $124,000 in federal money. They plan to expand the market season by 2 months, add a market for seniors and young mothers on WIC, and recruit more farmers selling produce.
Okay, so how about that? The government stops propping things up, and what do? They react like a free market enterprise. And they say we'll have a longer window for the market. We'll have a senior day for the market. We'll try to do things to drive more people to this farmer's market. Wow, you're thinking like a business, which is how a farmer's market should be thinking, right? Because there's more money to be made for everybody, for the people that run the farmer's market, for the people who sell their goods at the farmer's market. That's a win for all. That's how this is exactly supposed to work. What do we do to no longer have the federal government propping us up? Oh, we're going to have more days that we're open. We're going to be open for a longer period of time. We're going to try to get more people to our farmers markets. See, suddenly there's innovation. Suddenly there's capitalism at work. Not just the government printing money to make it easy for people to rest on their laurels. That's not how this is supposed to work. Let's continue with the Fox 4 reporting on this.
Dual purpose operation.
Get the food to the people and then help the people producing the food.
Henry says now they don't have the funds to hire a farmer's market assistant, and half the funds covering the current marketing manager's salary have been cut.
Okay. That's tough. I get it. Current person having their salary cut hurts. Was a farmer's market assistant really a necessity in Kansas City? Something that had to be funded by the federal government? Was that really a must-have when you talk about our tax dollars? Goodness great. No is the answer. I would love for somebody to convince me that the answer to that is yes at 913-408-7957. But something tells me even the biggest trolls who are always texting in with their TDS would not be able to do that. Come on, man. Hey, you proved me wrong. I know it's snowy this morning, but I'm happy to hear the case on why the federal government needed to be funding an assistant farmers market manager for the Ivanhoe Neighborhood Council. Please pitch me on that. Let's continue with the Fox 4 reporting.
Just try to find a way to make it work with what we have.
Yep.
She says they're working on strategy to replace the gap in the budget caused by the cuts.
Henry wants to make it clear they are not shutting down. She says they'll still host monthly markets, though plans for expansion won't be the same.
So the farmers market won't expand. That's different than saying they're going to shut down. It's a totally different case. And I found that line interesting there from the individual who runs the farmers market when she said, we'll make it work with what we have. Alana Henry said that. She's the Ivanhoe Neighborhood Council Executive Director. Welcome to the real world. We'll make it work with what we have. That's what we say here at KCMO. That's what you say in your small business. You're getting up this morning, you're driving in the snow across Kansas City because you got a business to run, you got a job to go to. You know what? You got to make it work with what you have. That's all any of us can do. And getting government dollars should not absolve you from that very simple task that hundreds of millions of Americans do every single day. All right? But you compare some of the details on this story to what the mayor put up yesterday on X, or 2 days ago on X, when he wrote, cuts by Elon Musk continue to devastate American communities. He said the Ivanhoe Council recently had funding eliminated that supports urban food production, backyard gardeners, local growers, and inner city farmers markets, and resources to provide healthy food to young mothers. They're still doing that. They're not shutting down. They're going to continue operating. They're just not going to be getting federal dollars that, frankly, don't exist. That's the only difference. And, yeah, they'll have to figure out ways to get by and make some more money. And that's what Americans have been doing, especially for the last 4 years, but really forever. I'm sorry, our federal dollars do not need to be going to farmers markets. All right? If a farmers market is that critical, the city that it resides in can fund it through their local tax dollars, not through made-up programs that Joe Biden tried to initiate during his 4 years in office. Those days are over, man. And thank goodness for that. It's not a knock on a neighborhood. It's not a knock on a city. It's about welcome to the real world. All right, so let's go up to our north in Iowa. I saw this going viral on social media over the last couple of days. And, of course, NPR had to write a story about it. Now, not KCUR, our NPR affiliate here in Kansas City, who we are absolutely kicking butt against every single day because you're listening to real news and real entertainment here on KCMO, instead of having one of those cornball NPR guys trying to sound really important with their fake radio voices, giving you some boring story that makes you want to fall asleep. Oh, my gosh.
Today in the news.
That's a good job there, Mark. Not that we want to lose you, but if we ever do, I hope it's not to NPR because you just gave them a good audition tape. That's a nice job. You just got to have a little Try to fake a British accent if you can. That'll make you sound even more important.
Yeah, I'll need to get Nick to help, Nick Haynes.
Yes.
To help me out with that.
He might be able to help you with that.
A man and a woman.
That's right. The headline from NPR, a fired National Park ranger lost his dream job. He said the public is losing more. I hate to break it to you, buddy, but I promise you that's not the case. And I mean that with all due respect. If you think your job is so important that the public is going to be missing you, you're totally clueless. You are living on another planet. And you think way too highly of yourself. Has anyone contemplated that with this park ranger? The ego on this guy? I mean, imagine that. Like, if you have ever lost your job, have you ever thought to yourself, boy, it really stinks I lost my job today. But you know who really is losing out? The public. How are they going to go on without me? Oh, they're not going to make it. It's kind of actually a douche mentality the more I think about it. It's kind of like, who are you? With all due respect. There's only a handful of people that you can genuinely think about in your life or just even in public in general, who if they lost their job, there would be some massive impact on the public at large. So, but of course, this guy, because he goes viral on Facebook up in Iowa, is now worthy of an NPR piece. I might have missed it. Did anybody read any pieces on NPR about businesses who got shut down by the government during COVID and how they're handling their livelihoods? Did NPR do any feature pieces on those people or no? I missed them as well, but I admit NPR.org is not one of the bookmarked tabs on my Google Chrome. So anyway, NPR writes here, Brian Gibbs lost his job as a national park ranger on Friday. He was working as an environmental educator in Northeast Iowa. It was his dream job, he wrote in a viral post on Facebook. The monument is the site of mounds made of earth built by ancient Native Americans that form shapes of animals. The 41-year-old father learned of his termination on Valentine's Day. I'm absolutely heartbroken and completely devastated. Gibbs is one of about 1,000 National Park Service employees who were fired this past week. Parks advocates say the layoffs could leave national parks understaffed going into a busy spring break. The recent cuts to the federal workforce, which target probationary workers, writes NPR, are part of a plan by President Trump and his advisor, Elon Musk, to shrink federal spending. I feel bad for the guy. I do. I feel bad for anybody who loses their job. Okay? But NPR promoting a national parks employee in Northeast Iowa as some kind of heroic figure that this country can't operate without is just a bunch of nonsense.
How dare you?
It's like I read this stuff and it's like something out of the Babylon Bee. You guys are really trying to make us think that the country can't operate without a park ranger in Northeast Iowa. We're $36 trillion in debt. I mean, this article is a great case for defunding NPR. That's what this is as well. If you need another example of why NPR should not get $1 of your tax monies, this is an outstanding example. This fluff piece that's hundreds of words on a no-name national parks employee who went viral on Facebook and had the audacity to say that the public is losing even more than he is when he loses his job as a park ranger. So I'm sorry, but like NPR, people lose their job every day in the private sector. It stinks. It happens. Many of us have been there and have dealt with that before, whether it's firsthand, whether it's seeing it, whether it's having to lay people off. And guess what? That's the situation that the country finds itself in right now, whether you like it or not. And this was last night on CNN. I thought this was outstanding from Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful himself, saying that not only should we be cutting the federal government, but he argued that the cuts aren't deep enough.
The issue is they're not whacking enough. There's this concept in private equity when you get a bankrupt company and you go in there you cut 20% more than your initial read. And then you find, like a pool of mercury, the organization gels back together again. Always cut deeper, harder when there's fat and waste. The FAA, it's not the people. The code is cobalt. It's from the 60s. It needs CapEx put into it for the technology to be upgraded to make it safer. Fat like a chicken. All of these agencies are like big fat chickens dripping over barbecues of fat. This is the best barbecue I've ever seen, but I don't think it's happening fast enough. They're not cutting enough. Keep slashing, keep hacking while you have a 24-month mandate before the midterms. Cut, more cutting. Believe me, it's going to work out just great. Everybody should be happy
with the nuclear codes, cut them too?
Cut everything. Because if you don't see what they're doing and they can't show you that they're adding value, you whack.
But it's clear.
That's Kevin O'Leary, and I could not have said it better myself.
The issue is they're not whacking enough.
That's perfect. They're not whacking enough. That's what needs to happen. Okay, and you will get inflation down to 0% if you start figuring out how to actually balance a budget and not run a $2 trillion annual deficit. And he talks about, whether it's air traffic control or anybody else, looking at capital expenditures, that's what he meant when he said CapEx, and making sure that you're investing in things that allow you to run a leaner operation. And most levels of government and most bureaucracies are not doing that because guess what? They're not competing against anything in the private sector in large part. They become a jobs program for the government to buy voters. So whether it's someone at the FAA, whether it's this guy who went viral on NPR or that NPR wrote about, who's a park ranger in Northeast Iowa, I feel for anyone. But at the same time, my goodness, you got to understand the crisis the country finds itself in. And when you have very competent and highly successful business people who actually have made money in the private sector telling you what needs to be done, maybe listen to them. Because what we've been doing is not working. 913-408-7957 on a snowy, frigid, record-setting cold Tuesday morning on KCMO. We're glad you're here. Dave Trubert, bottom of the hour on 95.7 FM. And coming up, an outlet played something that they didn't want to play and they didn't want to report, but they had no choice. We'll get it to you next. Well, Bill O'Reilly is exactly right there. It may not work out, but it absolutely deserves a chance because we have really since FDR seen nearly 100 years of the government growing and growing and growing and nobody really trying to pare it back. Reagan did a little bit, but that was kind of it. Over the last 90 years, it has to end. Unless you want to see the country collapse under itself and interest rates remain sky high, which hurts the average worker. Hurts the average person in this country. You can't run these $2 trillion deficits every year with $36 trillion in debt. And the only people really getting rich are those at the high end. They're the only ones making any serious money. And, of course, the lobbyists and the politicians and those in and around Washington, D.C., while middle America and many small towns around America get hollowed out by the day. This deserves a chance, and it should not be as political as some people are making it out to be. In the meantime, as we look at the scout cam around Kansas City right now, the snow is falling. It looks like we're not getting it as bad as we thought we were going to get it. I mean, I'm still seeing grass out there, looking out from our studio from Corporate Woods at 435. So we're only, a couple of inches of snow at this point. And what's falling right now is kind of that dusty light snow. So coming in this morning, there was at least 2 lanes of blacktop on 435, and you can see it out there as well right now. Traffic is moving mostly, I would say, at regular speeds. We do still have eastbound I-70 closed out at exit 24 in Grain Valley. So keep an eye if you're heading out that way. But otherwise, just some stalled vehicles around the metro. So keep up the good work. There is now actually a crash to report at I-435 westbound at Quivira. That's in the right shoulder. So that is something to keep an eye on if you are down this way. Also a crash, I-435 southbound. that is at State Ave. So be prepared to stop. That should be cleared in the next few minutes, but not creating any kind of major backups in either part of town as well. So notable news there. Let me play this from Frank Luntz, CNN. Frank Luntz, I guess he noted on social media he took a couple of weeks off, and he looks like he got a new hairdo, a new wig, or dyed his hair or something. I don't know. Do you see how jet black his hair looks, Mark? I mean, it's crazy.
It's very interesting.
It's like, bro, that ain't your real hair. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's an animal on your head that's dead and, you died, but that ain't your real hair. Either way, Frank Luntz, big-time political consultant, was on CNN yesterday and had this to say about voters who had voted for Biden and Hillary Clinton but flipped to Trump in 2024.
We wanted to have you on because you do a lot of focus groups. You really get behind the numbers, the poll numbers, to the sentiments of voters. And it's so interesting. You've been speaking with a number of voters who were Hillary Clinton 2016, Joe Biden 2020, and then went for Trump in 2024. How are these folks seeing the early days of Trump's second term?
Pretty well.
Really?
And they're reacting to it because they love the pace of change. They were very fed up over the last 4 years. They wanted action. They wanted results. They looked at prices. They looked at affordability, looked at immigration, and they didn't see anything happening. They still don't like what he says, but they like what he does. And these are Democrats now who felt that they were not securing the border. They were doing nothing to prevent illegal immigration, that nothing was actually happening. They wanted to see a reduction in wasteful Washington spending, and they're seeing that. So what they tell me is, I wish you'd be a little bit less rude. But at the same time, they like what he's doing. They believe he's serious about it. And for the first time, they have confidence in the future, which is why you now see some significant shifts in the polling about the expectations for the direction in the coming years.
Frank Luntz yesterday on CNN talking about those who had voted for Hillary and Joe and switched to Trump in 2024. They may not love him. They may not love what he says and how he says everything, but they like the pace and they like the policies. And in a perfect world, they like you and they like your policies. But if you're Trump, you know what? You've come a long way from 8 years ago when they didn't really like you and they didn't really like the policies. Now, most importantly, at least they're liking the policies. Hey, Mark, do you remember the name Deborah Birx? Deborah. Do you remember her name?
I don't know if I do off the top of my head.
Okay, well, you weren't with the show then. So you were a busy man running around with Amazon. So you were listening to sports radio, trying to get your mind away from all the COVID crazy, which I totally respect. But Deborah Birx was kind of like Fauci's right-hand woman. She would do those press conferences during COVID, and she was not as offensive as St. Tony, but, she was obviously a very prominent figure during the COVID era. And I heard her in an interview with Piers Morgan this week, and I thought to myself, this is the first kind of admission that anyone of that stature from that era has given up to this point. Tony would never say something like this. He would never admit this kind of fault, this kind of wrongdoing during that COVID period of time. But I always liked Deborah a little bit more. I always thought she came off as a little more likable. She wore those scarves that drove me nuts, though. Is it scarves or scarves? I guess it's scarves, technically.
Scarves.
Scarves. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Not a big scarf guy. But she wore the scarves that just drove me nuts. It was like every day was a fashion show for Deborah with the scarves. But she's kind of done the old Homer Simpson, like backwards walk into the bushes and no one's heard from her in a while. But she did go on Piers Morgan this week and admit this about how the COVID shot was rolled out and how there actually are consequences today that we are living through based on how public health officials handled themselves and handled that shot almost 5 years ago now.
And what we've done wrong in public health is we didn't explain that COVID vaccines were nothing like the childhood vaccines, and that the childhood vaccines, like many of the diseases, you get it once, you don't get it again. And this is getting the children to have that disease without getting the deadly consequences. That is not what the COVID vaccine was designed to do. It wasn't designed to prevent against infection. And if you look at the vaccine hesitancy rates, they've doubled since COVID. So we have to start addressing these things. We can't just ignore them.
And Deborah, let me ask you, Deborah, I mean, given that you were the face of COVID from the Trump presidency at the time, do you share, this doctor who I was with, do you share the concerns about the longer term negative impact of some of the COVID vaccines?
The messenger RNA vaccine should have been rolled out for the people that were at risk for severe disease, because that's what the vaccine was developed for. But when we say that we're following the science and the data, we need to follow the science and the data. And the science and the data said people primarily over 65 or people with significant comorbidities were at risk for severe disease. Those are the individuals that should have been immunized first. And we should have put our science behind our immunization schedule and protected those most at risk. It went into young people in hospitals before it went into our elderly in nursing homes. That is not following the science and the data. So I am all for following the science and the data, but it shouldn't just be a statement. It should be a reality.
It's not a perfect admission, but it's the closest thing we've got. And it's a million times anything Fauci's ever said. And for that, I will give Deborah Birx some credit for making those comments on Piers Morgan's show this week, because it's something that is long overdue for people like her to say. Because she's right to point out that vaccine hesitancy has come out of COVID, and that's not good either. Like, let's be very clear. It's not good that people are now skeptical of every single vaccine that exists, when by and large, most of them are, doing the job they're intended to do. They're good for people. They're good for society. They're good for the country and the world at large. But because of the way that our public health leaders treated COVID with a one-size-fits-all approach, and the way that they tried to shame and bully people with their media allies into something that was truly not a vaccine of any kind. I mean, she's admitting there it was not intended to prevent infection. They did this to themselves. And at least admitting it is the first step, right? It's not good that we now have vaccine hesitancy for other things, but they've done this to themselves. And the first step is admitting that, and then we can start having a better conversation about how we get back to a world where we're able to actually have real conversations around, hey, the large part of these vaccines are good for people. Here's what they are and here's why. COVID, we screwed up. At least then you'll get some respect back from a large portion of the American public. And of course, let's not even talk about the people who got fired from, private sector in some cases, but also the public sector. People who lost, their jobs in the military. Young, healthy people who had no business needing this, ending up getting fired from serving in the military because of the insanity in 4 years ago. And in the meantime, what you have now is like these stories. I saw this, NPR had this story of this viral Facebook post from a guy named Brian Gibbs up in Iowa, just to our north, who got fired this week from his national park ranger job. And the headline is, a fired national park ranger lost his dream job. He says the public is losing more. Wow. Way to think highly of yourself there, Brian. NPR gives you several hundred words on Brian Gibbs, 41-year-old guy who lost his park ranger job, as if the world's going to end. Did they write anything at all at NPR about the thousands of people who lost their jobs in the military because they wouldn't take the COVID shot? Something tells me those features were not part of NPR's headline stories back in 2021. But call me crazy.